Welcome, Chief Casmer, and also Chris Dennison. So glad you could join us today. I also want to thank Mike Humphrey for setting up this meeting. Here we have a late comer. He is going to be joining us, but he's running about 15 minutes behind schedule. So anyway, he should be here soon. I would like to start the meeting off, though, with a brief statement about the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that works to empower and educate citizens on ways to improve government. The League encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The League of Women Voters believe that gun violence is a serious public health issue. Several years ago, following a 2-year study, our state league passed a very comprehensive gun safety policy, which allows us to advocate for a number of common sense gun safety regulations. So our primary focus today is to discuss what TPD is doing to address the issue of prohibited possessors and straw purchases here in Pima County. Our gun violence prevention team did prepare some questions for you, but perhaps you or Chris have an opening statement you would like to make before we jump into those.
Yes. Again, my name is Chad Casmar, Chief of the Tucson Police Department. Thank you for having us present today. As you noted, is Assistant Chief Chris Dennison, who oversees our central investigations and our violent crime initiatives. I guess I would just like to open with, while I appreciate the specificity of the questions that you've asked, we take a much more holistic view at gun crime, what's causing that, why we have it. While your questions will relate to part of the investigations that we do, I'd like to just give you maybe 2 minutes at a high level of some of our strategies. 2023 was an introduction of our department's strategic plan. We really didn't have one when I came back, and what I heard from staff loud and clear was, hey, we don't know what our priorities are, and we don't know what we should be focusing our effort on. So one of those goals was to have a 90% solve rate of homicides and reductions of both homicides and non-fatal shooting incidents, specifically bullet-piercing cases, by 10 to 15%. Proud to say that we did accomplish both of those goals through our evidence-based initiatives. So when we talk about evidence-based strategies initiatives, we talk about hotspot policing. We refer to as POP, precision-oriented policing practices, and that's where we actually dispatch officers to geographic areas of town at specific times and have them there for doing intentional things, and then we document and we track that. And what we can see is that's resulted in double-digit reductions in violent crime in our hotspot locations. We utilize social network analysis, which is basically what it actually sounds like, where, when we have a violent crime investigation or we start connecting the dots of who's connected to who, we start looking at social networks, and we do analytics on that. We try to connect the dots, and we're doing some really fascinating work in that space. We apply focused deterrence, which sounds, again, like the title. When we identify folks that are involved in risky behavior, both as victims or suspects of crimes, we're going to them and saying, hey, look, there's really only one outcome here, which is, bad things are going to happen, whether you find yourself incarcerated or worse, injured or dead. We're launched this year on community-based violence interruption, and we're partnering with the University Medical Center. And what that is that's another evidence-based strategy that we have Bureau of Justice Assistance grants dollars to help us stand up this committee. And effectively what that is it's a group, and it's an organization who will go out when we have non-fatal shootings and work with the victim to say, again, okay, what lifestyles, behaviors, do you have food insecurities, housing, do you need to get your driver's license? Like, how do we get you out of this circle of violence? And hopefully we obviously get them to communicate with us who shot them, who harmed them, so we can solve the criminal part of the investigation. But the bigger goal there through CBBI is to just to break up cycles of violence and poverty and get folks making different directions. We stood up our Crime Gun Intelligence Center. We're really proud about our efforts with that. It is basically bringing our NIBIN program where we look at shell casings of spent shell casings of weapons that look like fingerprints on human beings. There's something similar for every single firearm that puts an imprint on those shell casings, and we're doing some really amazing work. We do celebrate that work publicly, but what we don't want is to be so public about it that the criminal folks involved in criminal behavior are starting to pick up those brass shell casings after they've committed crime, because we're doing some really neat things with that. We have 3 place network investigations, which again really focuses on through a data-driven approach to where is the most centralized, concentrated gun crime in our city. We pick 3 locations throughout the city, and then we focus city resources holistically. We work with management, we work with the city attorney's office, we work with housing, and we really go in and we start looking about what are the root cause drivers of crime in these areas, and how do we break those cycles up. We're always looking for networks. We tend to, when we have a part of town where we're having violent crime, it's not by happenstance. There's a network, a criminal network, not like what you would see with organized crime or necessarily gangs, but a network of individuals who are up to no good and are responsible, a small group of individuals who are responsible for most of the violent crime in that area. We also have created a tactical investigator model, which is when we have one of those non-fatal shootings, how we send resources out, how they effectively communicate, and they work with patrol and bring that information back to central investigations. They've re-engineered the way we really look at violent crime. And we were talking about it before we went on recording, but our professional staff investigator program. So we brought on 17 new team members that really function almost, everybody's probably normalized now with community service officers out in the field that wear light blue uniform, they drive patrol cars, and they really take work off of the commission resources hands out in the field. We have a version of that we've developed over the last year, and we launched on that this year. So that program so far, they're in the advanced stages of their field training, has worked out really well. We have retained all 17 of the team members who are going through that program, and we're really excited about the opportunity. And we did model that. It wasn't our idea. We modeled that off of Phoenix PD, went up there, checked out their program, and then brought back down a program that we thought would work here in Tucson. So what is all that translated into? Well, the national solve rate for homicides floats around 52%. Our homicide solve rate last year was 90%. So, I would only add that what also goes into that is community being willing to work with us and to bring tips forward, and be good partners, both either as victims or witnesses to some of these crimes. That's translated into, we had 86, we peaked at 86 homicides in 2021, dropped that number by double-digit numbers in 2022 to 75. In 2023, 58, and we're about 17 year to date. So we've had 22 to 32% reductions of homicides in different areas of gun crime in the last 2.5 years. And we had a reduction of our non-fatal shootings from 13% from 187 to 162. Now, what I would tell you is those are still higher numbers than we should have in our community. They're higher numbers in San Diego. And there's a lot of, we think, I'm sure that's maybe a little shocking to think, like, how could Tucson have higher crime than San Diego? I think some of that goes into the rate of poverty in our community, our proximity to the border, and accessibility of firearms. All go into that. We've certainly, like a lot of other parts of the country, stolen guns getting in the hands of juveniles, and then juveniles being involved at crime, at violent crime at younger and younger ages than we've historically seen in the past. So I'm going to stop there. I have more, but I know I just threw a ton of information out at you. Hey, Mike, good to see you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Chief Casimir, could you, before we were having a conversation before we started recording this meeting, and you were talking about the number of people in your department. Could you review that again?
We have 1,203 team members today total. That's commission and professional staff team members. We have about 760 deployable police officers. We have another 50 in various stages of training. We actually had the first year in 5 years where we grew by, it doesn't sound like a big number, but we grew by about 4 officers. So on Jan 1 this year, we started at +4 commission officers. That sounds great, but I'd just like to highlight, so we've cut our attrition in half. We're about 3 officers a month. So When you lose, let's just even say 30 officers, and you multiply that by 10 to 20 years of experience, you can quickly lose 1,000 years of experience in one year alone. And so with 9 months of training, we do some amazing things at our own academy, Southern Arizona Law Enforcement Academy, but it's not a substitute for on-the-job training and the exposure and experiences that our troops get. So what I'd like to get to is a 900 commission and 300 professional staff, operational professional staff model, which is a mix of between our CSOs and our PSIs. We have 150 CSOs, about 20 of those folks are in various stages of training, and we have 17 PSI. So I think this is an achievable number in the next few years. Obviously, you've probably heard on the news, the city's really taken it in the shorts on some sales tax revenue changes at the Capitol under the previous administration team. So that's going to hit us with about $50 million of funds over the next 2 years. So that could impact our hiring and what we're going to look like. So we're still working on that with city leadership, but we have to keep our foot on the gas pedal as far as recruiting the best talent, retaining the best talent that we have, because the workload is tremendous. We are seeing reductions of overall calls for service, but there's still a tremendous amount of work for a small workforce.
Great. All right. Thank you, Chief. Chris, do you want to tell us, give us a list of the things that you do? Oh, you're muted.
I know 3 years into this whole communication this way, I think I'd get this right. So I oversee the Investigative Services Bureau. So I have the Central Investigations Division that's under me. And that is pretty much all of our violent crimes against persons. So it's homicide, ag assault, robbery, adult sex, child physical abuse. We have the special investigation section that's put in with Central Investigations. So that is our human trafficking, internet crimes against children, our sex offender registry team, our fraud unit. We're standing up 2 additional shoot teams, and our gun NIBIN units. I oversee the R section for the Counter Narcotics Alliance, which is all of our narcotics investigations and undercover operations. And then I have the Forensics Division, which is the evidence section, our crime scene technicians, and the crime lab. So that that's just one part of a massive machine that is the Tucson Police Department. So
okay, thank you. Well, shall we jump into questions? And then some of these questions and the comments that are made may generate additional questions. So we're a small group today, so just kind of jump in with your questions. Mike, did you want to handle this?
I'm trying to call them up on my phone, so I have them in front of me. Can you go start with it, Kathy?
I will go ahead and commence. Okay. The first question we had was, what role should or does TPD play in the enforcement of ARS 13-3102A5, which is the selling or transfer of firearms to a prohibited possessor?
So I'll thanks for the question. I'll have Chili Chief Dennison get into the weeds on that, but I'll start with, so I think we do have a role. So one of the programs that I was waiting for some of the questions, so I didn't throw so much at you, is a public safety partnership technical grant from the DOJ. Part of that brings together a monthly meeting with all of our federal partners, to including the U.S. Attorney's Office. So it's really actually hard to to really define where we don't have a role in working with our federal partners. Anytime we have a prohibited possessor case, we evaluate what's the potential best charges for that case, and whether it's running it through TPD and up through the county attorney's office, or if we work with our federal partners and we take it through the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we partner with ATF, FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we currently have are up to 52 different cases that we've worked with them to find, what is the best charge, to basically get the offender, especially if they're a repeat violent offender and they're in possession of a prohibited possessor. Those are certainly the cases that we want folks to be held accountable and spend some time in jail to keep a violent offender off of the streets. We're also currently working on deputizing one of each of our community response team members so that, and what that means is that they have federal prosecuting abilities with our federal partners beyond what most of our typical officers do. So we've had greater success, frankly, with those cases with the ATF and Gary Restaino's team at the U.S. Attorney's Office with federal statutes over our state ARS charge. But Chief Dennison, I'll let you put the bow on top of that answer.
Yeah, so in regards to the transfer of under the ARS statute of transferring a firearm to a prohibited person, yes, it absolutely is a state statute. What we found though is federal law has much better regulations and prosecutorial authority. Their statutes are specifically built for these types of crimes. So one of the nice things that, and Chief Kazmar alluded to with the public safety partnership, is we've really expanded our relationship with ATF and FBI. So there's a few things in that realm that we look at. All firearms that come into the possession of the Tucson Police Department. Actually, we have 16 other agencies that contribute to the NIBIN program. One of the things, but specifically with TPD, every firearm that we run it through an E-Trace program, which basically we want to try to track that firearm to find out when it was purchased, who it was purchased by, and see if we can figure out how it ended up where it ended up. And so what we look at it, we call it time to crime. So from the time the firearm was purchased to the time that it was involved in an offense, and then was the perpetrator of that offense, were they a prohibited possessor? And in times where we have short times to crime, and we also have the fact that that weapon was purchased in a short period of time prior to the crime, we actually give those cases to ATF to assist us in investigating them for straw purchase investigations and going federally as opposed to state charges, because we know we're going to get a better sentence on the back end of it, and their statutes are specifically built for that crime. So we've had discussions with the county attorney's office. They're in agreement with this decision, and obviously the U.S. Attorney's Office is very interested in straw purchase casing, along with ATF. So we've had some success in there. We do run operations with ATF. We're going to be running an operation here shortly with HSI with some people that are suspected of being involved in this. So that, to answer your question specifically with the transfer of firearms, we typically don't charge under ARS. We actually like to use our deputized folks that are deputized to investigate and charge federal law. We like to use those folks to go after them on the federal side with the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
In talking to people I know in the firearms retail industry, and talking to Gary Restaino, and talking to the county attorney's folks, the situation I see, there's a hole in the enforcement on this. And here's what I think I understand about this. When I talked to Gary Restaino, he said that the U.S. attorney is only going to go after that purchaser if the firearm is found at a crime scene. So that's okay to do that. It's okay in that you're going to go after somebody who did something wrong. But I guess what I don't think is happening is we're not doing enough to stop the purchaser at the time of the purchase, before that gun gets into the hands of someone who's going to go kill somebody or hurt somebody. And I'm just wondering, is there any way locally we can begin to intervene at the retail level, at the FFL dealer level, to once these people are identified, and the retailers have to let ATF know if they think this is a suspected straw? Is there any way that local law enforcement can be involved at that front end of the transaction, so that if someone is identified as violating the state statute, that we could go ahead and charge them, and at least warn them that if you keep doing this, you're going to go to jail?
Yeah, Mike, totally hear where you're coming from. We agree. We would definitely like to intervene and stop ahead of time. One of the issues we do run into is obviously there is a legal right to possess firearms in the state of Arizona. One of the things that we push with the FFLs, and some are fantastic at this and some are terrible, is it really is on the FFL who's actually doing that transfer of the firearm to provide that information. And if they suspect that there's going to be an issue or a straw purchase issue, to deny the sale of the firearm and report it to ATF and or the Tucson Police Department, because it will go through our special investigation section. So this is something we have been discussing. It's something we're obviously concerned with. It's not just a Tucson problem. We do see this due to our proximity to the border. We have a lot of weapons that are purchased in the state of Arizona and ran into Mexico. The weapons a lot of times don't even stay local within Tucson. So that is something we do. And again, where it comes back to us is at the time of purchase, we can't, it's hard to prove that they're going to then take that firearm and transfer it to a prohibited person or do that straw purchase because they could actually purchase a firearm. Does that make sense? Like we have to be able to build that criminal case to actually charge them, to obtain probable cause, to get into the house, to seize the firearm, because it may not actually be illegal for them to possess a firearm. So there's some legal challenges that we run into doing that. So that's where we really track. And I know it's unfortunate, but we have to track time to crime for guns. And then we do rely on some of the FFLs, and some of them are better than others about reporting suspicious activity to us, so we can do follow-up on those complaints.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Let me go. I got the questions now, Kathy. If you want me to run them, you
Sure.
can go ahead.
go right ahead.
Okay, any more follow-up on number 1, guys, before we move on to 2?
Yeah, Mike, I would just say, I was speaking in front of a congressional group the other day, and I brought up the fact that ATF's commissioned staffing size has not been increased since they were created.
Right.
That's unacceptable. And so we all know why, because there's people that are freaked out about if you increase the commission numbers of ATF, they'll do more gun control. I think what you're asking for is in a perfect world, I can get my staffing levels or crime managed to a point where I can do more of that kind of work. I would submit to you, and I don't have the data right in front of me on how many guns we recover in violent crime incidents that were legally purchased or unlawfully obtained through primarily being stolen, trading stolen merchandise. But ideally, I'd like, ATF staffing to be increased where they could have a larger federal footprint on that. And what my suggestion to them was like, hey, earmark it for just this, like in a state like Arizona, where we know guns, they're straw purchasing being purchased either locally or for guns to go south of the border. We have to invest in resources. So there is I'll never tell you or any other community we can't do something because of the size of our department. But there are limitations, and you missed, I think, some of the opening on a conversation that we were having on just resources and what we're doing with that. So we are heading in the right direction. But I think, Chili, correct me if I'm wrong, over 2,000 guns were pulled off the street last year, and that's a large amount of firearms just in the city of Tucson.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the second question, it says, what role does TPD play in ensuring that firearms and CCWs are surrendered by prohibited possessors? Oh, by the way, Chad, didn't you get these questions in advance? I thought we sent them to you.
I think you did, but don't limit yourself to those questions, or if they've changed, we're open to any questions.
I just want to make sure you're not surprised by what we're asking. Okay, I'll go ahead and do the question. What role does TPD play in ensuring that firearms and CCWs surrendered by prohibited possessors per court order, especially in cases of domestic violence? Who is advised when this is completed? Is there a public paper trail? How could this process be improved?
Another good question. Chief Dennison, you want to tackle this one about just our ongoing work with Judge Millian and
Yep.
some of the grant funding that's allowing us to do some proactive work on overtime, which is not the solution, but it's a force multiplier, and answering your very question, Mike.
Yeah, so we are working with Judge Millian. She's a city court magistrate. She has a firearms technical assistance grant. One of the things that we're looking at with firearms are, there are times we have people who they're restricted from having a firearm because of a domestic violence arrest that might not even be a conviction at this point.
Right.
And because that's coming from the courts, and we all work for the government, this may be shocking, is that a lot of times we don't actually get that information. We don't even have any idea that these people that this has been restricted, or sometimes that may change throughout the court process. So we're currently working with Judge Millian to work with all of the city magistrates on when somebody's required to surrender a firearm, when that order comes down from a judge, how can we best intervene with that? How can we put a flag in the system so if an officer runs across a person who is flagged this way and they are in possession of a firearm, we know that we need to seize that firearm because they are technically not allowed to possess the firearm per a court order. Secondly, we're looking at funding through both the PSN grants, the Project Safe Neighborhood grants and funding out of Judge Million's grant to pay for overtime for our DV detectives. We are flagging cases specifically coming out of city court where there's been an order to surrender firearms. We know based on statements from the victim and or even the offender that they have firearms, that we will do follow-up to ensure service of those orders and sometimes orders of protections, and follow up and seize those firearms. Additionally, we have a model within our evidence section. Before we release any firearms, we actually run background checks before firearms are released. And we're flagging those court orders within our evidence sections. We're one of the only departments in the state that's doing this. And we've talked with Gary. We want to expand that practice across the state to try to ensure that firearms we take from people, that if they can't legally get them back, we're not giving them back to them because we don't have the information saying that they're not allowed to have them. So this, anytime we're dealing with firearms and we're restricting somebody's rights, this is it can be very complicated. So this is one of the nice things with this technical assistance grants. We're really trying to build a program that we could potentially spread throughout the entire state, if not even further, on how best to handle these situations, get these firearms off the street, and potentially keep them out of offenders' hands.
So, Chris, we were talking to Bob Buller a few weeks ago. He works for Judge Million. He's her firearm guy.
Yep.
And the issue of the CCWs came up in that discussion. So, what mechanism is there to make sure that those permits are surrendered or the state registry is notified so that they're taken off the list of people who can walk into a gun shop without a background check and buy a firearm?
Yeah, I'm totally drawing a blank on the name of the federal program. I can't even think of the acronym of it, but there's a federal program that runs through the FBI check, and it's I know it starts with an N, it's on the tip of my tongue, but basically that's what we want to be able to do is flag these in that system, because that's what we're doing our background checks through with the evidence section. So we are working with them how we can get that into that check. So somebody doesn't walk into a gun shop down the road who has a CCW in their possession. We want them to run that. They're going to run that check and see that a flag exists that they're not supposed to possess a firearm. So that's an in progress thing, Mike. It is definitely because there's so many moving pieces to this to that portion, right? Because it's not just purchasing. It's not just us giving their firearm back. It's they have that CCW. They walk in with that CCW card. We want to make sure that initial background check is run, that there's a flag in the system so another FFL does not sell them a weapon. So we're working on how that's going to play out.
So I understand the good work you're doing with Judge Millions and her folks. What about at the Superior Court or JP level? Are you having the same kind of luck working with those judges? Because they're also charging people and ordering them to surrender firearms too. What's the relationship between you guys and them? And are you having success with them?
Right now, one of the issues we run into, because it's city court's easiest because right now it is a city function. So the goal is to get this off the ground in city court and then move this over to Superior Court. I can tell you we have this concern because not just across state, we deal with this with the prosecution of other cases where I'll give you an example. We had arrested a lady in Tucson. It was for a prohibited possessor charge. She was released on her own recognizance. She was then arrested down in Santa Cruz County for a burglary, breaking into a vehicle and stealing some stuff out of the vehicle. We then picked her up on another charge in Pima County, and Pima County wasn't communicating with Santa Cruz County, so they didn't realize that Santa Cruz County case existed, and they ended up offering a plea deal that we think should have been a prison term as opposed to probation. So this goes into a much bigger picture on how we communicate, not just within Pima County, but within the other counties within the state for these offenses. So the goal is to get this off the ground with city court, have a good mechanism in place, and then we want to move this into Superior Court and then eventually to all the different jurisdictions in the state, having some form of centralized database that this goes into that we can flag off of.
Let me just add on to that to put a to emphasize though, we've been working on systems interfacing, Mike, not just with prohibited possessors, but for all court sharing information, because we have a system, TPD has a system, the sheriff has a system, Laura Conover has a system, Megan Page has a system, the feds have a system, Superior Court has a system. And I have to say, here's one example. Sheriff Nanis and I have been working on getting our 2 911 centers modernized where they can send instant messaging to each other. Right now, they have to pick up the phone to call each other to transfer a call for service. And that's the most glaring example of how our city county systems don't interface. They're like English and Spanish, and if you don't have a translation or translator or a service, they don't communicate well. And so it's not, and I would say, so it's with all levels of cases where, as chief, I've been working for 2.5 years to better understand where all of our workload is going and what the outcome of those cases are. So Laura's been a great partner. We do have good partnerships, but it takes money and time and bandwidth with county and city IT to be able to prioritize the work. And it's taken some allocation of grant funds too, because none of these interfacing requests are inexpensive. So work's been done. It's definitely we're not where it needs to be yet.
So what needs to happen to make that change? Is that just, are you saying that it's really an income basis that you're waiting for funding to get that? Because if there isn't communication in between the system, that's the basics.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. No, it's just taking time to get it caught up. So it's just I think we have all of the right leaders in the right places to make it a priority, including Jan Lesher and Mike Ortega now, who will be Timothy Chmure, and just making it a prioritized work. But, again, we're all short-staffed. We asked for 10 additional personnel within our city IT to focus just on public safety to do projects like this, and they got 1 person. So there's impact of that. When we ask for 10 and the IT director and I come together and say, this is the team that we need to be able to do these types of projects or have the right data in place, and we get 1, there's challenges with that.
So there's no like system in the legal system, like HIPAA violations in the medical system that I'm always working with, that doesn't exist in the legal system. So that's not for you guys.
No, it is a problem. It's a problem for Megan Page, who has different rights, who's a public defender, and what level of access of information she has and what she wants me to have access to. So it's not an impediment to it, but no, you're absolutely correct, where the system has to be built where we call it a data lake, and it's the easiest way to envision this. And imagine a lake that we all have access to, and we can all upload information, whatever we feel is safe and unguarded, and it doesn't violate HIPAA or any kind of statutory restrictions. And we put information into this lake every 24 hours. Then, as a consumer of wanting access to all that data, so then I know, okay, from arrest to initial appearance, to judge decision, to prosecution or plea, I want to know the outcome of every case. So that way we can evaluate our impact, right? We can't do that right now, but through a data lake, where we can all safely share information and nobody's firewalls are at risk and everybody gets to pick what information they share, you don't have the security concerns and you don't have the, as you described, HIPAA potential violations where somebody has access to information they shouldn't have. And that's even more important when we talk about our community-based violence interrupter programs, which will are obviously being collaborated with the University Medical Center, and their staff would have level of access to information that they wouldn't want to give me as chief.
I do want to put a little bit of a kind of a silver lining to all this. So we've been working with the county attorney's office to get access to their data. They have a new data system. So we have access to it for the first time since I've been on the department for 20 years. I can now look and actually begin to track cases to see basically from birth of the case to death of the case to what occurred to that through the county, through all of our data, and then matching it up with the county attorney's data. So I just got this demoed to me like a week and a half ago. And I've already been playing around the system and tracking to see, okay, what are we intaking? What are we ingesting in cases? What's going to the county attorney? What's the county attorney actually doing with those cases? So there's some things that we're still working on, some data sets that I need so I can drill down a little further in there. But we are definitely moving in the right direction. And then as soon as this is done, adult probation's on board. They're moving to a new data system. We're going to be able to integrate city court data. We're going to be able to integrate Pima County Superior Court data. So we're going to have a much better system. And really it is we're putting in the lion's share of the work to do this. And, Laura Conover's team has been great getting us this data. They're kind of one of the first ones that jumped on board and sharing this data. So it's been really helpful for us. So there is light at the end of the tunnel that this is that we are moving in the right direction. It is occurring. It's just, our system doesn't speak the same language as the county attorney system. So it's building in that API so that those data sets actually are accurate with a high level of confidence.
Kind of like all the patient portals we have in the medical system, huh?
I could only imagine what a nightmare that is.
Yeah, and again, you asked how work gets prioritized or how can you help? So we're doing all of these things on top of, we brought on a new report management system, which is like our central nervous system for the department. And it's really complicated. So we're about a year and a half into that project. There's also a program called NIBRS. That's a national mandated program from the feds and how we track crime in the type of the way that those reports come in from the field and through records. And we're not in compliance on that yet. We won't be through to the end of the year. So those are heavy lift projects that our IT partners have to do with us. So again, while all of the questions you're asking us, in a perfect world, we'd identify those issues and have those solved in a short period of time. When you add priority of work and a little bit of bureaucracy, it slows things down a little bit. But I'll just emphasize what Chief Dennison said. I've worked for the city for 28 years. I've never seen the level of collaboration that we have right now with the city and the county. So I am hopeful that we'll pull all these things together. It's just a matter of timing.
Any other follow-ups to number 2? Let's go into 3 then. What role should TPD play in ensuring that gun shows held within the city limits follow the new ATF rule 2022R17?
You're gonna have to. Yeah, I know a lot of numbers, Mike, and I don't have that one off the top of my head. So you're gonna have to throw me a bone here.
That's the one where they're going to have to screen the private sellers to make sure that they are not in the business of selling firearms. So 40% of the people at gun shows are private sellers. That's what's been estimated. So how are those folks going to get screened? How are they going to be screened to make sure that they are following the federal law in terms of they are truly private sellers and not pretending to be private sellers and they're really in the business?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the city of Tucson, we have gun shows in the city limits longer. I think we moved them all to the county. I could be mistaken on that.
No, you have one on Irvington, and it's the Expo gun show. It's 3750 East Irvington.
We don't allow them at city-owned properties. That's a privately owned property, is what you're getting to, Chief Dennison.
Gotcha. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll defer to my Chief Dennison's a little closer to me, but I think again that would, first responsibility. I'm not going to defer and just say it's a federal problem. I think we can collaborate, and we certainly have our task force officers. And hope the reality is those shows don't happen frequently enough where we can't go out there and do some collaborative efforts with those. But I think again that's going to have to continue to be a mutual responsibility between our federal partners and TPD and frankly the region to go out. Sheriff Nanos and I have had a couple different conversations about, could the county legally take a similar role and stance that we did on county-owned facilities that we did with the city, and there's some debate on whether or not they can legally do that. I think the sheriff, I won't speak for the sheriff, but I think he'd entertain the idea of challenging that rule and letting folks sue and letting the attorneys figure out if that was probable or not. So my answer would be that change and would be a collaborative responsibility between our federal partners and TPD.
Yeah. And I will add this, Mike. So we do routinely actually, and I just the ones in the city. I know we just talked about. There's one that's going to be in the county that's coming up. I don't have the specific date for it, but I did get briefed. We are going to be doing operations out there in conjunction with ATF, specifically looking at some of the new rules that are put in place and looking for straw purchasers and issues with certain vendors. So we do those operations from a county standpoint. I just wasn't specific on anything with the city.
So are you saying that you're going to be doing them at the Expo gun show? Because they're quarterly too.
Oh yeah. Let me look when I honestly, Mike, I got briefed on it with a group of other things I got briefed on. And we're actually think on this one, we're going to be partnering with HSI on that deployment. Okay. But yes, we do go out to the gun shows. We do go do different operations, looking for issues specifically with straw purchasers and other issues with certain vendors. And we do that in collaboration with our task force officers.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, this might be a very, very basic question. Who really should be legally able to walk in and buy a bunch of AR-15s at the fairground? I saw several individuals walk out with several AR-15s at the fairgrounds. not too long ago. How, I mean, isn't somebody questioning that? Who needs to buy a group of AR-15s?
So this is the one thing when it comes to people who are selling firearms, especially FFLs, when they're selling firearms in bulk like that, that we would like them to actually prevent that sale and report suspected activity to law enforcement. A lot of times they don't. The bottom line becomes the dollar and selling the merchandise, which is really what they're in it for. There's nothing illegal about possessing an AR-15 in the state of Arizona, going and purchasing them. I mean, I purchased, I have 2 AR-15s. I purchased one of them at a gun show. I didn't go purchase 10 of them, but we know this occurs and those become red flags. So those are indicators that we're looking at. If we see somebody who's doing that, we can follow up with the vendor and we can do follow-on investigation to see what happens with those weapons and where they go.
Yeah, Chris, I'm
And
a very naive citizen, but when I attended a gun show just recently, I was just appalled by the volume of AR-15s and rapid shooting pistols that were there. That I just thought, gosh, the average citizen shouldn't probably be walking around with a whole bunch of these.
Yeah, again, there's nothing specifically within ARS or federal statutes that prohibit the possession of those weapons or buying them in bulk. I know of people that, they could open up a gun safe and they could have 20 different variants of AR-15s in their gun safe. That is not, again, it's not a prohibited thing. There's people that collect them. There's people that like to shoot them. And unfortunately, we have people that buy them. Our concern a lot of times when people are buying in that bulk, that those weapons are then being actually moved to Mexico and being used down to further the drug war down in Mexico.
Yeah.
So just taking Wendy's example, let's say that there's a gun show at the Expo gun show, and a so-called private seller sells multiple ARs to a buyer. That to me would trigger someone from law enforcement going to that seller and saying, you clearly are not you're not selling grandpa's shotgun. You are selling multiple weapons, and have you been screened under the ATF rule? I mean,
Yeah,
at some point that rule has to kick in, right?
Yeah, so Mike, it absolutely. So if we look at the new rule, and I'm pretty sure you're referring to the one that was just enacted under ATF. I think it was within the last couple of weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like
Yes.
it was pretty recent. So one of the things that we would look at on that case is that would be housed through ATF. They would have federal jurisdiction because it's not a state violation. So the average Tucson police officer could absolutely do nothing with that. Our task force officers who are deputized could. So that's why we're working on expanding our footprint within the TFO program to give us more authority to enforce those rules and regulations under the ATF rules. But again, it goes back to Chief Kazmar's point. The size of ATF is so insanely small for the amount of firearms that move through any community, let alone Tucson with our proximity to the border, that it's impossible to catch everybody. So we do run operations to basically check to make sure people are in compliance. And it's not unheard of, we actually do this and we refer to ATF and we'll go out in a system where our special investigation sections will assist them. When something like that occurs, we'll go knock on people's doors and ask them about the weapons that they purchased or if the person is selling those level weapons. Since that's such a new rule, we're really going to have to see what the guidance is from ATF and how they're going to want us to interact with that with our TFOs.
Okay.
So Chris, I think when I first joined this committee, the first thing I heard was that, one of the biggest concerns is ATF wants local involvement, but what you're saying, local involvement can't get involved because they really have the law or prerogative or whatever regulations on their side and you don't.
Yeah, so just kind of break it down. So you have federal law, rules and regulations that exist that your typical local or state peace officer, so what the majority of us are, we can't enforce those federal rules, laws, and regulations. They're outside the scope of our jurisdiction. What we can enforce is state law. Now, on occasion, we have some of our members who become deputized as task force officers. I myself was a task force officer with DEA for a period of time. So during that time period, I could, when I was credentialed with them, I could enforce federal law because I was sworn in to enforce that level jurisdiction. So what we've done, and ATF has been a phenomenal partner for us in this, is we've expanded our footprint of task force officers to give ATF basically more boots on the ground to help them enforce those rules and regulations. So when, if we go back to 2022 within the special investigation sections, I think we only had a small handful of TFOs, maybe 3 or 4 within that entire section. We've expanded that pretty significantly now that we have TFOs. Some of them are sergeants with the FBI. We have TFOs with several TFOs with ATF, and we're going to expand that significantly to an additional 8 in the very near future. We have TFOs with the United States Marshal Service and with Homeland Security. So in addition to the ones that some other ones we already had with ATF, with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, with their C6 Violent Crime Group, and our DEA partnership, where we have several TFOs currently working with the Drug Enforcement Administration. So we're trying to expand our footprint that gives us the ability to enforce some of those federal rules and regulations. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, go get them.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add too is, and Mike, I'm sure you've done your homework on that, but it also requires to be able to prove that they're reselling guns or they're a repetitive dealer, we'll take some work with whoever's hosting those shows too, to, that, and you can imagine if TPD walks up or ATF walks up to the Irvington gun show location and says, hey, we'd like a list of your vendors. They're going to say, yeah, great. Come back with a search warrant. So it's not like we're welcome with open arms into some of these groups where we're going to have to build some of these cases. So it'll be a challenge.
I guess I was thinking maybe your business license division, I'm assuming they have a business operating license of some sort. Could that be something that's included in those rules, that you will follow ATF regulations?
It's certainly something we can look at. The city attorney, typically what we find that's a better tool than a business licensing is getting the IRS involved, which has more teeth on the back end.
Yep.
Okay.
Nobody's afraid of the city attorney's office, but everybody's afraid of the IRS.
Yeah, it's true. Okay. Any more on 3?
Yeah.
Any other comments on 3? Going once, going twice. All right. Number 4. How would you characterize the current attitude in your department toward the role your office plays in enforcing the removal of fire? Oh, we already talked about firearms and CCWs. I don't think we need to go over that one again. That's been answered. All right.
Actually, I do. I would, because it's I have an impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there might be some officers in your department who are, let's say, more sympathetic to the Second Amendment, have issues with that, and may not want to enforce some of these laws. Tell me I'm wrong. I would like to be wrong.
Yeah, I'd actually say perceived of folks being gun owners, as Chief Dennison described, would probably be more outlier folks than the folks like I was never really around guns. I didn't own my own personal guns. And I still have limited firearms to this day, 24 years into this, because it's more equipment to clean and keep up and keep out of the hands of my children and burglars and everything else. I don't think it's really, I don't get the sense, but I'm the chief, right? Like I'm not out there with the troops every day. What I would say that, where there's a desensitizing is when the laws change around CCW. Now everybody, over 21, it's not unusual to come across firearms. The first traffic stop I did, or actually 4th traffic stop I did, the first New Year's Eve, 2 weeks into being back as chief, and I pulled a car over, and the guy had a loaded Smith & Wesson on his lap, pointed at the door when I walked up, and I thought it was a stolen TPD firearm. So again, it's not unusual for officers to come across. So there's a desensitizing because there's so many guns out there. But the reality is we look at it as an officer safety issue. So if somebody can legally have a firearm, we want to be clear about why they have it, can they have it, where it's at, our safety on a traffic stop. One of the things that I came back when I came back as chief, I said, we've got to do more traffic stops. I didn't ask for more tickets. But traffic stops are one of the most dangerous, volatile things that we do, because you don't know who you're stopping, and you don't know if they're armed, and you don't know what their intent is. And we did over 35,000 of those last year. So I'm not thinking, we're thinking like there's a a gun ownership of like, we want to protect your Second Amendment. The rules are the rules for us. Like, we don't get paid to decide whether the rules are fair or not. The rules are the rules, whether it's states, federal, it's civil, it's criminal, it's administrative. So their job is to, be right down the middle on those applications. And part of it, what you might get the sense from, is just also workload. We did over 200,000 calls for service last year. So again, with 750 deployable cops, that's for everybody. That's not just in patrol. That's detectives, commanders, supervisors, patrol officers. That's again, there's a lot of different work. All of the questions you've all have asked today are very fair, and we would love to have full-time squads that go do this kind of work. It's just not the world that we're living in right now. And so once we continue to have success in our violent crime reduction, I think it continues to build up more capacity. So there's work we can do now to let the criminal, anybody who's violating Arizona revised statutes or federal laws, that we're paying attention, and there's accountability. But I certainly would like to do all of the things that you've recommended at scale, a higher level of scale in the future.
The reason I asked that is because I'm aware that there are some sheriffs in the state who would resist obeying some of these laws simply because they believe that it runs counter to the Second Amendment. So that's why I was wondering if you have any issues like that in your department.
City leadership's been pretty clear on their position on recovering guns, to the point where we were, sued and Capitol got involved. So I think everybody probably remembers those conversations under the leadership of Councilmember Gazachek. Again, when it comes to, I frankly wish we had the ability to destroy some of these guns, but under the laws that we're required to resell and do different things, some of our hands are tied with that. So I think, look, as chief, I have a little bit different role than a sheriff. I'm not an elected official. I work for elected officials. I'm not one myself, but I frankly have seen a lot of hand smashing and finger pointing across this country when we continue to have more and more active killer type environments. And we want to do our part in making the Tucson community as safe as possible. Maybe next time we have a conversation, it'd be good. And I apologize for not having the data set on when we look at our violent crime and the guns that we recover and homicides, what percentage of those guns are legally obtained versus which percentage of those guns are stolen or illegally owned.
Yeah.
You good, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, let's go to the last question that we gave you, and then I have one more after that. Number 5, how does TPD use the APRAS system, to prioritize risk assessment? Is this used in situations other than domestic violence calls?
So
Go ahead.
So appraise is the form we use. It is specifically for domestic violence. So anytime there is something that fits within a domestic violence statute, our officers fill out an appraise form. We are typically seeing over a night recently, we've really worked on this over the past year and a half. We're seeing about a 90+% compliance rate on appraise. We're far exceeding any of the other jurisdictions in completing this. And it is specifically a tool that the judges can then use for holding somebody in custody, potentially, having them surrender their firearms if they possess firearms, stuff like that. So it's an important tool for us. We absolutely believe in it. We believe in it to the point that I have my lieutenant, my 2 domestic violence sergeants review all cases that would be appraise worthy out of the city. And they determine if those appraise forms were completed. If they weren't completed, we get them completed and sent over. And we send audits back to the patrol divisions every 2 weeks to let them know where they're standing on completion of those forms. So to us, it's a very useful tool, and we want to make sure it's being utilized appropriately and effectively. And we've seen a significant increase in this. So we do follow up with our advocate partners, Emerge being one of the big ones we work with in the DV side. And we've gotten great feedback on what we're seeing. There was an issue with the technology piece. Gosh, boss, what was that about? That was 2022, late 2022.
Yes.
And it was a nightmare. And our research and analysis basically rebuilt that appraise form from that appraise system from the ground up to ensure we're getting proper transmittal to defense attorneys, prosecutors, the courts, emerge, everything. So
I think we were less than 50% compliance, and we really recognized that last year, and we had to work to get our arms wrapped around that. And we recently just met with Chief Dennis and I met with Emerge leadership to just touch base and see how that was going. I don't know if you were all able to see the Pima Regional Critical Incident video release on the officer involved shooting, where we had the standoff where the suspect shot at us 470 plus times with a long gun. That was a domestic violence investigative follow-up where one brother had aggravated assaulted his other sibling and happened to be a prohibited possessor, and was one of the high profile cases that we were working. That'd be a perfect example of what you're talking about.
Okay. Any other follow-ups on number 5? Okay, before I let you two guys leave, I'm going to ask you a question, and we would really appreciate an honest answer. Are you satisfied with the level of prosecution of gun-related cases in our community that you guys are involved?
I'll take this one, Chili. So, I mean, the simple answer is, you want an honest answer. It's a complicated answer. So I'd love to see more, Mike. I think it's the one category of crime that the county attorney works really closely with us to help us on, because they understand the impact. You're going to have to talk to Laura about it directly, but she's got staffing issues like everybody else. So at some point, this community has to decide, city and county leadership, what kind of impact we want to have on crime, and it has to be invested in. Right? We can't want caviar and we fund it at tuna. So at some point, there has to be an evaluation of how many resources do we have to go after the amount of violent crime that we have in our community. And on that, you know, she dedicates a lot of direct resources to help us with that, sits on our homicide panel directly. We do a lot of great work, but I think we could do more. We're the only place that we're continuing to work through with each other with a little bit different perspectives is on juvenile violent offenders. And we don't have consensus there, but we continue to try to find different ideas. But we're seeing juvenile violence at younger and younger ages involved in homicide, aggravated assaults, robberies. As a father of 2 sons, I'm not convinced that on some of these young adults that we can rehab them, at least with the systems that we have right now. You're almost guaranteed. Where we do have consensus is under the original systems that we have in play right now in incarceration and in the juvenile probation systems don't give us the results that we want or we need. And so it's not just talking about police investment. It's not just talking about alternative community violence interruption. It's really whole system investment. And so, you know, we're not using technology at scale right now, where the sheriff and I have been talking about that for 2 years with judges. They feel like there has to be some statutory changes before that they can make a decision and to direct folks to have technology be deployed upon them. But I think we have to continue to think creatively about system investment and technology and how we use that. And it can't just be the city. It can't just be the county. It has to be a complete metropolitan approach if we're going to have a meaningful impact and sustain this, you know, the level of crime at a lower level than we have right now.
So the level of prosecution is a matter of manpower, not philosophy.
I think on specific to adults, I would think it's, again, you're asking me simple questions to complicated answers, and you know that, Mike.
Okay.
So, you know, yes, there's my political desires. There's all of the individual judges at pretrial decision making up through taking the case to court. There's backlog right now where the Capitol is giving direction down to all of our local judicial folks that they need to get their caseload caught up. So that creates potential impact for us. So it's really complicated. You know, we recently had an officer shot at. I'm happy with the outcome of the decision in that case. In another case where, you know, my officer almost lost his life for a drunk driver that took his that took his leg and almost his life, and he's going to serve maybe 3 years at best in incarceration. So yes, sometimes it's staffing, sometimes it's political decisions with all of the folks within the system and their political ideology of what they think should, fair accountability is for a decision.
And how much of what you're working with has to do with drug abuse, substance abuse, or mental health issues?
Man, that you're asking whether that's the chicken or the egg first. I think when we talk about substance and mental health disorders, it's really difficult. But some of the violent crime is not. It's just somebody who, intentionally went out to take someone's property. I mean, that's always the argument. We go to court, right? Somebody was mentally unstable, or they had used methamphetamine, or they had done these different things. And in fact, the case of where our officer was shot at, where he pursued a vehicle after the suspect shot at another human being, that was the excuse. Well, I had a challenged childhood, and I was on methamphetamine that day, but this was like the third time. And so what I call for, I believe in a continuum of care. I don't think jail changes behavior. I think it has a captive audience for somebody that then we can invest resources in to try to get a different human being out of jail or prison. But in some cases, if you you take someone's life, you shoot a gun at somebody, there's a violent offense. I think we're still coming around in our country and certainly in our community that it's okay to hold someone accountable, and put them in jail.
I've got just 2 quickies, and I do want to respect the chief's time.
I got a few more minutes. I got to be off in about 3 minutes because we have another crisis that's firing up here that they need.
Okay. Well, then we probably shouldn't.
How about you give me one more?
Okay. Ghost guns. The Biden-Harris administration did indicate or announced a rule a couple of years ago clarifying that ghost guns are subject to existing firearms regulations. I was just wondering if you're seeing an increasing prevalence of ghost guns in Pima County that you're maybe picking up. And I'm wondering, what do you do with those ghost guns that you pick up that are used in the commission of crimes? Are they being resold?
Yeah, no, great question. I'll start and then I'll let Chief Dennison finish. But, we don't have as many problems with ghost guns because guns are so prevalent in Arizona. So we just don't have, we do have people manufacturing them. We do recover those occasionally. We have more of an issue with Glock switches or switches that make rifles full auto sear. So in 2021, we recovered 1 of those Glock switches. In 2022, we had 8. We're already at 5 this year. So, while they're low, we certainly continue to expect to see those. We have procedures in place where we make sure we process that at the crime lab to make sure the officers in the field didn't miss it when we test fire. But the ghost guns just aren't as prevalent. So if folks are 3D printing the Glock switches, they certainly have the capability to 3D print the firearms as well. I don't think that we're restricted to destroying those firearms like we are like a regular firearm, but I'll defer that to Chief Dennison.
Okay.
Yeah, so just give you an idea, we have seen a bit of an uptick in ghost guns. We recovered about 40 last year. This year, we're up to only about 6. Those numbers are probably relatively low just because of the presence of firearms overall. They aren't illegal to have. So there's times we may come across them and we can't do anything with them. But anything that's taken into our evidence section as evidence, unless ordered by a judge, by court order to return the firearm, we're not returning those firearms.
But just keep in mind, 2,000 to 40, right? 2,000 firearms to 40.
Yeah. So the
Chief
number.
Kessler, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Definitely. We appreciate you.
Thank you for your time and the tough questions. And I hope the sentiment is we acknowledge there's always more work to be done, and we'd like to continue to focus more and more of our efforts on the front end of the sale. But right now we're at a point where while we're focused on that, there's also a lot of work to be done with the guns that are out on the street and being used for nefarious reasons. And so we're going to continue to, again, we should be really proud of 20 and 30% reductions in homicides and the violent crime impact that we're having, but it's just the beginning. There's no near number in sight that I'm going to be satisfied with that, Chief. So we've got a lot of ongoing work to continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay,
Take care.
take care.